I saw him like that hour ago.
Oh, you have.
You don't want to just wander up and down the hall in case he's lost you.
Yeah, I think that just means, okay, well, let's open up the opposite.
I love this. I think it's genius.
It's absolutely right.
It's like for people who have, decades of blue sheet
Mentality.
in the muscles or whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, you are right. I was wrong. It is done.
Yeah, it is done. So.
There's a new version of 1588.
No, so they're going to the same amendment on all packages. So there's been an amendment published that says if you use alternate terminology, it's just, and it takes like time transfer and time receiver, stuff like that. But nobody had the endurance to go through the entire document. So they said if you use an alternate term, use this. We're not going to allow you to everything. This is exactly.
So what do you think this document should do?
Use existing terms.
Not the alternate terms.
Well,
Because you could use the alternate terms and refer to the amendments of the alternate terms. In addition to Oh, I have it. It's sitting somewhere in security out here.
Concentrated use.
It might be if it's a meeting. Yeah. Well, no, if it's a meeting versus like a event without tables and chairs.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, stop doing
I'm just guessing.
I think it's insult to injury that you're the very last session and you're in the furthest conference from both.
Yes.
that. We're what? The last session and
The last session and the conference room is furthest away.
right. We're the one hidden in the corner.
There's a secret way up in this corner.
All right. So on that note, we will go ahead and get started. Do you mind, Dennis, just popping into the hall and seeing, because I know he's here. Welcome to the NTP working group. We have had a last minute flurry of activity. So this is the IETF note well. You will have agreed to abide by all of these policies when you registered. It gives you all of the processes that we use and also our code of conduct, our anti-harassment policy, and those kinds of things. If you have any questions about any of these documents or the note well itself, please contact the chairs or our area director. Couple reminders on meetings, just sort of general admin notes. First of all, we will be using the online notes tool. Please feel free to contribute to that. If you look at the data tracker, if you haven't been using that, there's a link to the notes pad. And Dieter will be taking notes there, but others please add in as we go, and that helps us get more complete and accurate notes. Second of all, we do have both remote and in-person participants. So please use the queuing tool to get in the line. Third, if you could please be clear, concise, and respectful, that would be very helpful for the meeting. And please act according to our code of conduct. So with that, we have a really lengthy agenda of a lot of short updates. So we're going to go ahead and get moving on that. We have requested updates on all of the current things that we have ongoing. If you, is there any agenda bashing? No. Just a couple quick updates from the chairs. The documents that are currently past the working group and in the next stages, two of these we have actually short updates on the agenda later, both the NTP registries and the Chronos. And then the enterprise profile, if you were in here just prior to the meeting, we were discussing the status of that. We've discovered it needs we need an updated draft, and we also need an actual Shepherd write-up. So we'll be working on that. So with that, we're going to move on to the Chronos update. And Netta has provided us a short slide to just talk about the status of that document. See if I can find it. Chronos update. Share. There we go.
Hold on. Okay. So yeah, just a quick update of the concept draft. So following the IESG evaluation, we added some section like security versus load consideration, which also was addressed in the mailing list. Operation considerations, and also implementation status. And we also elaborate the Chronos pool and system process section. And we would like to thank Karen and our Shepherd Peter and all of you guys and in the mailing list for all the good and meaningful comments. So,
any questions on the status of Chronos? Nope. Thank you very much, Netta. She has been an exemplary author responding to all of the questions. The one thing I did forget to mention, if you are not a regular participant here, the way that you sign is you log into MeetEcho. You can scan the QR code there. We also have a QR code via a blue sheet, but as you need to, that's also the way that you get into the queue. So you do need to log into MeetEcho either with your phone or on your laptop and register for the meeting. All right, so the next thing on the agenda is the NTP registries. Let's see, I do believe we have. Oh, there we go.
Okay, next slide. I'm Rich Sauls. I'm Spencer, Rich, whatever. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so we had two issues that came up during the last call, and then one that was last night that I think is non-actionable. Related to the ASCII parts of the message, the NTP messages, the protocol units. They're very similar. There's reference identifiers, kiss of death codes, talk about it in the next slide. All of this had passed through without comment within the working group. But last call is a chance to find the things that we missed, and it looks like we missed a couple things. Minor discussion, and I've been through the archives. There are about 4 or 5 posts from about 3 or 4 people on each issue. Next. The first issue is what characters in text field. The current specification 59056 says ASCII and doesn't specify any subset. The draft proposed uppercase ASCII and the minus sign, the leading minus sign being private use indicator. Steve posted a list of, here's all the things I've seen, all sorts of mixed characters. We should clearly, the draft is wrong. Letters and digits in minus sign, printable ASCII, whatever that is, space 32 to 176, well, whatever it is, 41 to 176. 21 to 176. So I don't know what that is, but looking for guidance from the working group on this. I suppose printable ASCII is the thing to do. I went looking for a good definition of that, didn't find one, so we'll just say, the hex values, the binary code, the numeric value codes.
Any
Yeah.
I do seem to recall that there was, Eric Klein, I do seem to recall that there was some, the equivalent of printable ASCII definitions in, I think, the URL 3986 or in those sorts of spaces. They have some ABNF for things. If I remember, I'll try to find something.
Thank you.
Watson Lad, Akamai, there's going to be a printable ASCII definition that falls out of Unicode. So if you really want to go that way, but
I don't want to conjure the ghost of Rob Sayre. If you, anyhow, okay. So I'll try to find something and get help and say that the field should be printable ASCII. Okay, next slide. Second issue is private use things. This lets people register fields, what was it, kiss or death codes, and references that are not, reserves a space for private use. The current one is X. We don't know, since they're not registered, of course, how many people are using it. The draft proposed use a leading dash. And that the experts should check with the working group if someone wants an X. And thanks to Eric Klein, AD, for that. Do we have an opinion? Keep the current practice is less controversial because it's the current practice. The dash is, nerd aesthetics. So.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I would have a slight preference to keeping the X around, just because it's what's currently, at least in NTP-DRS, is in active use.
Anyone strongly bothered by that? Okay, we'll change that. I think that's it. Is there one more slide?
No,
Okay.
that's it. But did you go ahead?
There was mail that came through yesterday, very, very lengthy. Oh, the draft is full of all sorts of errors. And so I bring back Usenet days, went through point by point. I found one suggested editorial change to make, but I encourage people to consider reading it, and I'll put out a new draft that captures both of these two changes and the one editorial change, and get that out, sometime next week.
Okay. Any questions on the registry's draft?
Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right. So the next item on the agenda is going to be a very short discussion from Dieter on the future of leap seconds, because it leads into the two consensus calls that we did for the NTP-v5 requirements draft, one on leap smearing and one on which modes of service. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to go through the two consensus calls.
Can you display? So I'm sure many of you already are informed about this matter, but others may not. So I want to present a short summary of the resolution. Next slide, please. Of the resolution of the General Conference on Weights and Measurements regarding the future of leap seconds. First of all, what is a CGPM? It's a supreme authority of the BIPM, and it consists of member states and associated states all over the world, roughly about 100. And last year they had a resolution on the difference between UT1 and UTC, and you can read that. And I suppose most important is that with 2035, the difference between UT1 and UTC shall be increased from the current value, which is 0.9 seconds, to whatever. So that's not fixed yet. But the resolution also states that a new value for this difference shall be proposed by the CPIM and the ITU, and shall be a plan of action shall be planned in order to apply this new maximum value. And then on the next meeting of the General Conference of Weights and Measurements in 2026, they will perhaps agree on this agreement. So that's only just to inform you about the future of leap seconds. I suppose for us it's important to know that we certainly have to deal with future leap second insertions with NTP. So please don't ask too difficult questions regarding this. If you want to have more information about that, you can address Christoph, who is involved in this process. Okay, then I can continue with the consensus calls. We had, next slide please. We had 2 consensus calls regarding the requirements draft for NTP version 5. The first one, yes, the goals of these consensus calls have been to help to advance the requirements draft and to resolve this a discrepancy between the current version of NTP version 5 requirements and the current version of the NTP protocol specification. Next slide, please. The first one was a question about leap second smearing. That is to say, shall the transmitted timestamps or shall so first of all, shall NTP version 5 consider leap smearing, and if yes, shall this information be transmitted by the server? And we had rough consensus that for both of these, that is to say, leap second smearing shall be considered in NTP version 5, and this information shall also be disseminated by the server to the client. Next slide, please. There have been a lot of comments about how to do this. That was not in the scope of the call actually, but my impression was that we have a common understanding that during the period of time in which smearing is applied, the server should send information to the client so that the client can be aware of the offset between the smear time and UTC. Okay, so from our point of view, way forward for this, for the requirements draft is to add language in order to support smearing and dissemination of this information. Yes, James, go on.
Before we move on to the second point, it sounds like the consensus is clear that it should be included. I'll update the document, but the full nitty-gritty details of what needs to be included is not fully clear to me, because looking at the responses, it sounds like there's several different approaches that we could take to how smearing is announced. And in my head, there's still a few questions unresolved, such as, does the server announce that it is smearing even when it is not, to say that it has smearing capability, for example, and several other points that probably need fleshing out in detail. But we could either choose to omit them from the requirements draft and just say it has to support smearing and then argue about it in Miroslav's document, or we can choose to take the path of being super nitty-gritty in the requirements doc. I'm okay with either approach.
David?
To immediately respond to that, I would suggest that we do not become incredibly nitty-gritty in the requirements document. Also in line with the policy of having running code for stuff. I think that's just a lot easier to hammer out these specific details once we have a more concrete spec and people have experience with building code to that spec.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, my preference would be that we do not put the details of how it's done in the requirements draft so that we can get this document done and out the door. I know Miroslav is waiting on consensus on these two issues before he really updates the NTPv5 spec. So
Okay.
Hi, this is Doug Arnold from Meinberg. It was just brought up that there's important details about how smearing is announced. I think it would be worth announcing separately for a server to say, I'm currently configured to smear leap seconds when they happen, in addition to saying I am currently smearing a leap second right now.
So just to clarify what you're saying, that they should, we should have two options, or there's two scenarios. One is I can do it at some point in time versus a leap second is occurring and I am smearing now.
Not just that I can do it, I am currently configured to do it when a leap second happens. That's so that people know it's coming.
So it's something like it's in addition to a leap second announcement. So you would announce that that the server is configured that he's able to do that. Okay.
Yeah, if you look in Miroslav's proposal, he essentially does that by identifying that that's the time scale I'm using is smeared UTC. And so then even if a leap second isn't happening, then you know that if a leap second comes up, it will be smeared. I think that's an important thing for a client to know. In addition to it is happening now, I am currently smearing, that should also be a flag as well.
Hi, this is Dennis Riley from Equinix, and I agree with Doug that it's important to announce that the server is configured for leap smearing. If for no other reason, then the way NTP is configured, you're not always using servers that you've configured yourself. So without that notification, you have no way of knowing whether a server you're connected to is going to smear or not, and you may care about that.
Okay. For the purposes of James's document, though, this is a NTPv5 specification discussion and not a requirements discussion, right?
Okay.
Okay, then we can proceed to the next consensus call that was about modes, which shall be supported by NTP version 5 in addition to the most used client-server mode. So the question is, shall NTP version 5 additionally support symmetric and broadcast modes from the previous version of NTP? And in this case, we only have a slight majority that would prefer to only to support only client-server.
Right. So as Dieter indicated, we only had a slight majority, and as any of you who are following the mailing list know that it was a lengthy conversation. One of the things, was this on your later? I don't remember if this is on his next slide or not, but one of the things, we should go to his next slide because I think we worded the question wrong and I think we need to clarify it.
We're going to the next slide. Okay. Okay. So way forward. I think we have to rephrase the consensus call in order to become clear answer to that case. Suggestions are based on the comments from the mailing list that NTP version 5 must support the client-server mode and may support additional modes. And additional modes require contributed text or could be specific, specified separately.
David, are you in the queue for this topic?
Yes. I must, on the previous slide, I'm a bit uncomfortable with how we formulated and framing the discussion now, and would suggest that we move at least back more towards the IETF rough consensus model and not a sort of voting language.
I guess what we're really trying to say is we did the consensus call. We did not feel there was rough consensus. And so based on that, we were like, oh, we really didn't word the real option that we were looking for was not yes or no. It was, I think the question is, do all of the modes need to be required for something to be NTP v5? And I think going forward, what we want to say is server and client are required and the other modes are optional. What we currently have in the draft, those modes are, we don't have any language around those. That language needs to be developed and contributed to the document, or a separate document needs to be developed. Is that a better way to look at it, David?
Yeah. In terms of the content of this discussion, I still have some things, but I think Nada should go first.
Nada? You need to go to the microphone. Sorry, we have remote participants.
Neta Chief. I just wanted to say, regarding to this specific question, can we maybe support also maybe not all the symmetric modes, but maybe we can support broadcast, because this is something that that raised in different part of the group, that maybe we can improve security next, because we can rely on this program broadcast mode. So maybe just to support that as well, not as a default, but maybe just to have it on the NTP v5.
Right. I think the intention is not to deprecate any of the modes. It's to specify what the minimum
requirements are.
What the minimum requirements are.
So maybe we can add the
so that implementations right now there is a debate about implementations right now. If they don't support all of the modes of service, are they actually NTP v4 implementations or not? And I think the consensus is that a large majority of the traffic on the open internet is actually server client, and so that that's what we should have. Now, the challenge we have in this working group is that we have an author contributing text who's interested in 2 of the modes of service, and we need to get the rest of the modes of service documented. So we need people to write that. So if there's anybody who's interested in learning more about NTP in general and NTP v5 in particular, we would love to have contributions that support those other additional modes of service. We're not trying to get rid of them.
Oh.
We just,
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Stay right there. Yeah. Question for you then. Would you like broadcast mode to be a must or a should, or in with all of the rest of the maze?
I think it should be supported.
Should.
Yeah.
So for the remote people, you say broadcast should be in the all caps should be supported.
Are there any more? Oh, David, go ahead.
Yes. I want to contradict you at least on one point, and that is that some of us are actively trying to get rid of these modes. Me being one of those persons, to be quite honest. But let's keep that discussion on the mailing list to keep things a little bit more concise here. I do have one question, and that is regarding IETF processes. How likely are we to get a document past primarily security review if there are massive open holes in it, which with broadcast mode is something that I at least don't see how we are gonna close.
I don't know how to answer the question. How likely are we to get that through the process? I hear your concerns. I think without seeing what text gets contributed, it's hard to actually address it. I wonder, for the purposes of the requirements document, if we can go with the requirements document saying that it must support client server and it may support additional modes, and then we can cross those other bridges when we get to it. Does that make sense?
A little bit. Let me reformulate the question then a little bit.
Okay.
From the IETF, what are currently the requirements on security in new protocols? Let's phrase it that way then.
Eric Klein. I would say that if you brought a document that was a new protocol to the IETF and it had all kind of security holes, you would spend a lot of time addressing discuss comments. However, depending on how you want to phrase things, you don't have to pitch this as being new. If you want to pitch this as being an evolution of V4 and say this is no worse than what we currently have, you could try to make that argument. How well that's received, I don't know. But yeah, if the intent is to present this as the newer, cleaner thing, I would expect security to have strong thoughts on anything that has no security properties. Although you might also be able to address it by an applicability statement. This is only applicable in lands that secure something. Or this is only applicable in the following environments where the following security properties can be guaranteed by something outside of the scope of this document. You could try for text like that if you wanted to. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not.
Yes, that pretty much answered my question.
Okay. And the summary for those who had bad audio was that it says to put some. Eric, can you put your statements in text? I guess that would thank you. I was going to summarize it, but if their audio is bad, that doesn't make any sense, does it? All right, so I think we have a way forward. James, does this address the open issues you have on the requirements document?
Yeah, I think this does. I think for the supported modes, if we take the approach of must support client mode and may support additional modes, that is enough to wrap things up. In terms of cutting a new version, that's something I can do over the weekend or so. Is there, I guess, a question for you guys is, once I cut that new version, is that now the opportunity for working group last call?
I'd like you to publish a new version, and then we'll circulate it for a few weeks. And if there's not a ton of comments at that point, then we'll do a working group last call. I think it's time to wrap this up.
Yep. And then my other question is then who's going to document shepherd it, and are they going to do an early review?
I don't know who's going to document shepherd it. Are there any volunteers? Is there somebody who would like to learn the document shepherd process? Oh, I see a really slight hand wave.
I'm willing to help coach someone if you want to learn about.
Netta has volunteered to be the document shepherd for this. Very hesitantly, apparently. Yeah, exactly. So yes, so we do have a document shepherd, James. It'll be Netta, and the chairs and Eric will help her through that process. And thank you, Netta. Any other questions, James?
No, thank you for doing the consensus call.
Okay. So we have a couple items where we don't have any slides. I just want to give a couple updates on them. As I mentioned, Miroslav was unable to attend the meeting. He was waiting on the consensus calls before he updated the protocol specification. This specification has been around for a little while now, and it has been adopted as a working group document, so we do need to get some comments in on it. And we also need more review of it. The NTP over PTP document, there was an update submitted, and hold on one second. That's funny. So basically the update from Miroslav is that there's no update to the NTP v5 draft. We need to wait for consensus. We've gotten that one now. He did say consensus on timescales as well, and we've already gotten consensus that we're going to support. We're going to allow this we're going to allow alternative timescales, correct? Yeah. So I don't think we're stuck on that anymore. The NTP over PTP draft was updated to address the comments from Martin and has other minor improvements. The main remaining task is to find out how we get the PTP TLV type assigned, whether the IETF has an organization ID that we could use for this. Regards, Miroslav. So that's where we are with that. And I think I will... I'm not sure if that's been asked of the 1588 community or not. I don't think it has been, so we'll need to figure that one out. So those are the updates on those two documents. And that takes us to NTS for PTP. We still don't have an updated draft on that, but...
I spoke with Martin Langer, and on behalf of him, I have following information. There has not been an update since the last meeting. There are currently some open issues with the document or content changes that are pending, and that he intends to include in the next version, which he intends to submit in fall this year. After that, he would like to have an adoption call for this document. And which is also interesting, he wants to start an implementation of this stuff in August this year.
Okay, so that brings us to rough time, and we have Watson here. Oh, sorry. Oh, he's off the queue now.
It's fine. The question can wait till the mailing list.
Too many windows. So just to clarify, David, you said you'll send your question to the mailing list?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Oh, slides. Sorry.
No.
Good help is hard to get.
Okay, I'm Watson Ladd. I'm one of the authors of the Rough Time Draft, and I'm going to sort of update on progress since the last several meetings. Next slide, please. There hasn't been much. There's been a lot of discussion on the mailing list. There's been a lot of outside interest, but that outside interest usually stops at, it would be great when it's out there and deployed and working, and then the next step of, okay, so you're going to run one of the things that we envision in the protocol, right? Well, that's what we get. And, the authors have also been distracted. So some of this is my thing, but some of it is the interest in getting the problem solved is not translating into effort actually solving the problem on the part of some of the organizations and entities that you might envision running certain parts of the protocol. So for those who might need some recollection, this is essentially certificate transparency for time. We need to have servers, but we also need entities running things to check on the servers and deciding what servers are trusted. slide, please. Implementations. So there were a lot of them. There are fewer of them running. They all run different versions, and they're not getting updated. We are not really in the way, we're not forming the ecosystem I was envisioned, and some places had layout and have refocused, and that means that some of the bursts of interest that we've had before aren't there. Then there's the value of the draft. And, from discussion of Liz, it's clear that I'm not really doing a good job as an author explaining the value of it. And the reason is sort of, people might not be familiar with the nitty gritty of what actually happens when you try to deploy PKIX across lots of devices and they have bad clocks. And it's a problem that, you don't really run into in a lot of environments, or you sort of get by it once and that's fine because then the computer knows what time it is and reboots up the next time. I see Rob shaking his head like it doesn't really happen. Yeah. And a lot of the obvious applications have good enough workarounds, or they just suffer with the pain now. Next slide. So what to do? Well, there need to be some consensus scrolls. We've got open issues on the GitHub. Do I just go ahead and close them and send back, okay, here's what we decided. If you complain, but then there's sort of a bigger question. If there isn't going to be this ecosystem, then the ecosystem draft that explains a lot of how we envision these things working is sort of very aspirational. Do we drop it, try to fold it into the wire format? Does it make sense to have a standards track document for this big thing that's not really getting deployed? Do we need to retarget the experimental? Are there, should I take these issues, post them in a list, ask people to, we also have to talk about like GitHub versus list in terms of like how we work to close out these issues. And sort of what's the path, if we do have an experimental thing out there, is that what we're going to do and see if people start adopting and then maybe come back when we find problems later, or maybe we never come back because nobody bothers to find the problems and deploy it. So these are all sort of questions that I can't as an author really answer. That's for you guys. James?
Biggest question that I have is that my understanding is that of recent times there were two sort of groups that were interested in it. There was a team inside of Google, I think, to do with software integrity, and also there were some people chiming up from automotive. Do you know if they're still interested in this or not, or have they also moved on to other things?
See the slide mentioning, yeah, so basically within Google, I've heard from people who are familiar with the situation that they are now focused much more narrowly. And automotive, I haven't heard from in quite some time. I mean, to be clear, on the way to this meeting, I chatted with someone from major browser, and they were like, yes, it would be great if you solved it. They're not here.
Because I would like to help with this, but I'm not I don't work for somebody who would actually deploy it. So I realize that my work would be purely limited to the editorial side more than anything else. But
well, that would be helpful. So next in the queue, I see David. Or do you want to...
Yeah, for me, part of the reason why. Okay, so I come from a company that at the moment is doing a lot of time-related implementations, not so much as deploying them ourselves, but providing open source implementations for a lot of these things. One of the reasons we haven't even done more than a cursory exploration of rough time is with the current draft, at least for us, it's very unclear what its place even is. It seems to do a lot for a lot of different people, and for solving this sort of bootstrap problem, it seems overly complicated in that it supports quite a bit that seems to want to do more than that. But So I think part of the problem, especially now that some of the early adopters have sort of moved on, is that the current draft might not be targeted enough to really grab the attention of people.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Bob Beck, bad system time clock enthusiast. I think there's probably interest of this in a variety of bootstrapping problems, whether that's a browser, whether that's an operating system. I think, you know, if I look at your options, I would say moving to a GitHub project might be a slightly better way to get more interest. I think we need that traction. It's the if you build it, they will come, but you haven't built it. You need that little bit of traction to get there and answer the, where do we get a list and who's enforcing that list kind of thing. It's almost like running a root program. And sorry, I have one more. The CT comparison, again, I don't think, as someone possibly involved in CT, CT is hard. This isn't hard. It's not. And that comparison is probably doing you no favors. But I would probably be interested in helping out on several of those fronts.
Yeah, and to me, the GitHub thing is just about how we work on the draft. The authors are using a GitHub project, and then we're putting the drafts here. It's about, do we want to have conversation on the draft? And this is something other working groups have done. But yes, thank you. That's very helpful.
Spencer Dawkins, cloning, acting as Rich Sauls. Yeah, I think the CT for time is, that's an engineer way of thing. I think there is a major problem is what happens when a system boots and it needs to verify a PKI. The fact that it could make this call and see more or less that it's accurate, I think that's a major selling point. And then the other thing was, I think the browser guy person was like, would you please run one and then we'd use it. So maybe, but I'll also help. I think we can make the sales job a little better, and then it's actually pretty easy to deploy one of these things, right? A Raspberry Pi with a GPS and you're good to go.
Eric Klein, no hats. I'll just say that sometimes people have asked me, what's the difference between rough time and NTP plus NTS? And it's been a long time since I've had a chance to look at anything, but I do not have an elevator pitch ready to go to give them an answer back. So if that exists in the document, then that's great. If it could exist in a document, that would be also great.
Bob, did you want back in the queue?
Yeah, just to speak of the alternatives that people have, that I'm involved in at least two of them, all of them involve trusting a big guy. And in a world where we don't want people to be forced to trust a big guy, this is a way that you don't have to do it. And maybe those would move that direction if they had an option that didn't require them to trust a big guy.
Go ahead, James.
Is it an idea that it sounds like there's a couple of people in this session that would be interested in helping out. Would it be an idea for us to have either as part of a official NTP interim or something else completely separate, just a call where we just sit down and work out how best to tackle both the rough time spec and the ecosystem doc? Is that something you'd be willing to do, Watson?
I think that's a great idea if other people are interested. And I don't think it has to be too many for a online call.
Yeah, I'm definitely down for that.
Okay.
Next slide? Or say it, of course. That is the end of my slides. This is sort of the open conversation. We might as well have it while looking at a clock in the area as per tradition.
Did you have any? I mean, it seemed to me we got what we needed for today, or?
I think we've gotten what we needed.
Okay. The one, and we have it sort of as in any other business at the end, is I think Deisha and I felt like we needed to have scheduled a couple of interim meetings because this is a group that seems to flounder in the absence of occasional interim meetings. We also had originally thought that people wanted to do hackathons activity around NTPV5 and rough time here. And we sent out the request a couple times and nobody actually indicated that they wanted to do that. I know some of our developers are in Europe and are not at this meeting, so perhaps it might make more sense to do it in Europe. But we are interested in both hackathon activities around both rough time and NTPV5. So perhaps you could be prepared to actually demonstrate running code in November. So that actually brings us to any other business and way forward. So the first thing is we were planning, looking at doing 2 virtual interims between now and the next IETF meeting. We're looking at mid-September and early to mid-September and then mid to late October in advance of the IETF meeting in November. Is there anybody who thinks that's a bad idea? Go ahead, Watson.
One of September or October is filled with numerous dates I won't be able to make.
Well, we will work to see if we can get you there. I think there's 2 things here. One is just doing the virtual interims for NTP in general. If you want to do like a design team meeting around rough time, then that could be easily scheduled on your calendar versus my calendar, which is always helpful. So there's Dieter and I will get together and do some scheduling around those. And then the second item is we are in Prague for November. And so we would like to see some running code around NTPV5, and we would also like to see some around rough time. So if you're at all interested in participating in that, we'll go ahead and put, we're planning our calendars in such a way that we plan to be there. And then hopefully we can get some of you all to contribute. I think in the past, especially if you look at the NTS effort, we've had a lot of success with using hackathons to get stuff moving and get the right people in the room and the right discussion. I tried a couple times to ensure that I know that the NTP group in particular has a lot of people who don't regularly participate in the IETF. I see we have pretty good online participation for this. I do know that I've heard of at least one person who couldn't join the meeting today who had planned to. I did send out some announcements in advance. The one question is the tooling for the interim meeting, whether we want to stick with MeetEcho or whether we want to go back to Zoom. Is there any, I see shrugs. I mean, everybody here is working with MeetEcho, so the advantage to MeetEcho is you don't need a client and you don't need to install stuff. The advantage to me for Zoom, of course, is I use it every day, so it's convenient. Okay, so no preference. Yeah, maybe we'll flip a coin and see, but if anybody feels strongly that one tool would make it easier for them to participate rather than another, then please get in touch. But you do need to be aware that you need a data tracker account to get into these meetings. It's not the data tracker account is free, but you still have to have it and you have to do your homework so that you know how to get into MeetEcho. The other downside is, well, actually the new client for MeetEcho is working better on mobile devices. But that was the other downside for a while, was that you could actually use a phone to dial into a Zoom meeting, whereas you couldn't do that for MeetEcho. So with that, we're at the end of the NTP agenda. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add? Thank you all for joining in on the last session of the last day of IETF 117. And thank you everybody who joined online. We're done. So Eric, before you run off, let's make sure we're on the same page with Doug.
What am I gonna do, more work?
No, you're not going to do more work. You're going to
It's probably both, to be honest. Because, here's one problem I want to talk to you about. Probably have a solution for this. Because we have an update. And the problem is, nobody else we know or has a solution for us. And there's so if we do something, do something. I know how to do something. The flip side is wearing my other hat. I do things like play around. First of all, my fingers are and I play around with things like my favorite pen OS is before we go multi-user. We want to make sure that we're listening to shit show and numerous things about time blocks or shit show. We have all sorts of ways to ensure last thing in the file system, last thing in the build data, all sorts of ways to again, what's ultimate is decide because we grab our first and then we go ahead Apple, Google, Amazon,
It's like the extended terminology thing.
time definition,
You
and
use the
fully
terminology
HTTP
to say up front.
and see if there's no layer use this bounds for a standard. This lets us do this with trust. Yes.
Yes.
Way forward, running browsers, trusted browsers.
That's not what I expected you to say, but sure.
Everybody hates Google and.
Well, we just had this discussion about.
That's how you should promote it.
Everybody hates Google and, I can't just say that.
For the first time, they're actually visible on the wire. Things that are in a document somewhere.
At least you're
We're getting liaison statements from all these people, right?
You're not CPN everybody. Well, CPN is guys.
Nobody knows. Yes, nobody knows.
And I think in the IETF, that just becomes a thing we have to fight about. Right. I just don't care about.
Sounds like a lot of search and replace.
Yeah.
But we do, it would be advisable to link specifically to.
Yeah, I can add that as a reference.
No, shut up, shut up, shut up. No, you guys. This is how you get.
They had access. Access to documents provided to. Yeah, I looked for when I posted the change, I looked for it on the, right now on the TikTok archive. I can't see where it went to. I know it went to you, and I know where it went to the authors, but I thought the things also go to the mailing. You got no mailings? Okay. Then I just. Good. And as soon as this thing is in the archive, and NTP is already in charter. So that we can.
So I'll do that. I'll submit a new version.
Unfortunately, that's you would be great to call or.
Yeah. I got another comment from Peter Meyer.